University commencement speeches don't often get headlines in the New York Times, but the 2019 University of Chicago commencement speech from economist Luigi Zingales did.
In the Chicago tradition, I wanted the convocation speech to be a speech about research and about my research, because for those of you who don't have the fortune to be Chicago alum, you should know that Chicago is unique in having convocation speeches delivered by faculty and not by celebrities.
I've participated in enough commencements to know that I'm just a person between you and your well-deserved graduation party.
You know, I was facing the competition of Angela Merkel teaching at Harvard.
Yes,
so that
right.
was not an easy thing to deal with. So I wanted it to be about research, but also that is in contrast with something that other Chicago faculty before me said.
In true Chicago spirit, my goal is to deliver a speech that is provocative, research-based, and relevant to you in this moment.
Zingales' speech was certainly provocative. It focused on many ideas and questions from his research. Mainly, is American capitalism working or failing?
If you grew up in Italy, but then I realized in a lot of other countries, I know a lot of colleagues who grew up in different parts of the world, and they all at some point face this question of capitalism versus socialism and what is right in capitalism and how do you create a better capitalism is a question that is basically with you all the time.
The debate over American capitalism is shaping up to be one of the defining arguments of the coming decade. It is already one of the central themes of the current presidential race. Democratic candidate Bernie Sanders has explicitly called for the country to move towards socialism, while candidates like Elizabeth Warren say capitalism is still worth saving. It just needs to change. Like Warren, Zingales wants to save capitalism, and he thinks we have a shot.
You want to save the planet, eradicate poverty, and racism, but you find yourself working 10 hours a day for a company whose only proclaimed goal is to maximize profits. Many of you feel powerless. Your choice is constrained by a world we, the previous generation, built. A world you don't like, but you feel you cannot change. Fortunately, this is not true.
From the University of Chicago, this is Big Brains, a podcast about the pioneering research and pivotal breakthroughs that are reshaping our world. On this episode, Luigi Zingales and Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists. I'm your host, Paul Rand. Love it or hate it, when you grow up in America, you grow up under capitalism. It's the bedrock of our country. But with presidential contenders like Bernie Sanders, that may be changing.
Senator Bernie Sanders is making his case for democratic socialism.
Economic rights are human rights.
Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country.
But this tumultuous debate is nothing new to someone like Luigi Zingales, who grew up in Italy. What Zingales saw growing up in Italy was a dangerous marriage between the economic elite, who used their wealth to gain political power, and the political elite, who used their economic strength to control government. In a system like this, what you know and what you do doesn't matter, only who you know and what you do for them.
To me, what was very revealing is, in my generations, there have been a lot of Italians who came and studied here. And all of them came here as super leftist. And when I say leftist, I don't mean Elizabeth Warren leftist. I don't even mean Bernie Sanders leftist.
Right.
I'm talking about to the left of the Communist Party. I joke that you need a GPS in the United States to figure out how far it is, okay? So all these people came here, and all of them turned into the most extreme free marketeers. I don't think it was just being exposed to economics and study economics seriously here, etc. I think it was also a system that at the time appeared, and it probably at the time was, much more fair.
As a young adult, Zingales saw freedom from the elites in Italy through American capitalism. And for many years, he studied and wrote about the system's ability to create jobs, lift people out of poverty, and inspire immigrants the world over. Then things started to change.
I saw that if you look in the last 40 years, the system has not delivered for everybody. While on average there was a huge increase in wealth, this increase was disproportionately concentrated in a small minority. And actually, the most scary fact is if you look at the salary of the median male worker in the United States, that salary had not gone up in real terms for the last 40 years.
Concentration started to make the country he had come to love look more and more like the country he had left. His research and writing started to interrogate a new question. What's wrong with American capitalism, and how can we fix it? The result was his 2012 book, A Capitalism for the People.
There is a natural and, in a sense, a healthy tension between a democracy and a capitalist system. A capitalist system tends to reward disproportionately a few and reward more the more talented and the one who work harder. And so it does create inequality. And that doesn't sit down very well with a democratic system where you want to kind of redistribute and equalize. And I think that this tension is very healthy, but it is balanced only under a number of conditions. And one condition is that the system delivers some benefits to everybody. There is an opportunity to everybody to move up in the ladder, and that the system is considered relatively fair. It's particularly painful to be left behind in the game of life. It's intolerable if you have the perception that the game is rigged.
Right. That's a very, very politically perfect word for right now, because you hear that system is rigged in just about every political commentary these days, don't you?
Absolutely. But the irony is, I think that I said it before anybody has said it. And not only that, in my book, it's written pretty clearly that given this, populism is going to be inevitable. And then the question is, which kind of populism you're going to get?
Right.
I have to say, so far, we didn't get a good one. But the irony is my book, as you pointed out, is kind of partly autobiographic because it's the story of an Italian coming to the United States, seeing the United States as the model of the success of capitalism, etc., and seeing over the years this model deteriorate and getting worse and looking more and more similar to his country of origin, Italy, and not for the good aspect, the food and wine and the beauty that is around Italy.
The Berlusconi aspect.
But for the Berlusconi, exactly. You said the right word, the Berlusconi aspect.
Mafioso, thief, go away. After supporting him at the ballot box for nearly 2 decades, in the end, the Italian people had nothing but anger for Silvio Berlusconi.
For those of you who don't keep up with Italian politics, Berlusconi was an Italian real estate tycoon turned mogul turned politician who became the prime minister of the country for 9 years. Sound familiar?
And so it was a natural evolution to say, look, if the United States are going to get along this path, the natural outcome is a Berlusconi-like figure. And I saw what, of course, everybody else later saw, because for an Italian it's so obvious, but for anybody once you pay like a little attention, the similarity between Berlusconi and Trump. And
amazing.
They are both phenomenal salesmen, phenomenally egotistic, obsessed with women, obsessed with hair or lack of thereof, and with a very distorted view of capitalism, because they both started their business in real estate. Real estate is the least competitive business in the world, the less free market system in the world, is most about connections at the local level and most about monopoly.
And that's the key idea for Zingales, competition. Almost everything in his work comes back to the way competition creates growth and disperses power to everyone.
For example, last year, Google let a lucrative Pentagon project expire because its key engineers did not want to help develop a technology that could be used to wage war. LGBT community rights were recognized first in the business world, not because of the open mentality of business leaders, but because of their desire to attract the greatest talent. In a competitive labor market, companies are fast to adopt if adaptation is required to attract the most qualified workforce.
There was a brilliant and path-breaking idea that Adam Smith brought with The Wealth of Nations, is the fact that competition is the genius that makes sure that the pursuit of self-interest delivers the common good. Okay?
Okay.
And a lot of people have misinterpret and mischaracterize Adam Smith by saying Adam Smith said that greed is good is absolutely wrong. Adam Smith was a moral philosopher. His other book was paying a lot of attention to other feelings like empathy and etc. So he was very aware of morality. What his contribution is to say, look, a system that does not rely on everybody being good is a more reliable and resilient system. In a world in which everybody's a saint, we don't need the law, we don't need economics.
Which doesn't exist.
Exactly. But unfortunately, it doesn't exist.
Law firms have a tobacco career track for those lawyers willing to defend tobacco companies. Tobacco lawyers earn more and make it to partnership faster. While this difference may seem wrong, it's essential for the market system to work. Your reluctance to defend tobacco companies reduces the supply of talented tobacco lawyers, thereby increasing their wages. When it becomes too expensive to hire defense lawyers, tobacco companies are forced to settle. It's precisely because it becomes too expensive to behave immorally that even businesses without a conscience end up behaving as if they have one.
So if you're today a young man in Italy or somewhere else, are you still looking at the United States and admiring the capitalistic system, or are you looking at it and saying that is not working?
I fear, and it's hard to put yourself in the feet of a young kid today in a different part of the world, but I think that it's more difficult to sell that image. As a financial economist, I witnessed the financial crisis with particular attention and care because it was part of my main area of expertise.
Okay.
And so I saw the devastation, I saw the effect, I saw all the distortions. And after the financial crisis, for a long time, most of the media attention was focused on beating on the financial sector.
Right.
After a while, I said, okay, a lot of people are doing the job. They don't need me to beat on the financial sector. They're doing plenty.
Go find somebody else to beat on.
I want to see what is the next problem, not the problem of the past, but what is the next problem. And I realized that a lot of what I saw in the financial sector was actually assembling in the tech sector with some additional twists that made it even more dangerous.
Why does one of the world's leading economists think the tech sector is the new big threat to capitalism? Well, that's coming up after the break. If you're listening to Big Brains, there's a good chance you consider yourself a lifelong learner. However, you may not know about the University of Chicago's Graham School and its focus on continuing liberal and professional studies. For more than a century, Graham has been a destination for lifelong learners. They offer courses online and in the classroom, bringing the transformative education U Chicago is known for to students of all ages. To learn more about the courses, certificates, and degrees, visit graham.uchicago.edu. If you blame a lack of competition for the decline of American capitalism, then there's one industry that's going to draw your attention more than any other: the tech sector.
There are some corporations, very small in number, but very relevant in size, that do not face real competition. These are monopolies. It's easy to see what a monopoly is. How many people in this audience use Bing as main search engine? Please don't be shy. We'll not be old against you. And how many people use Google as a main search engine?
These entities, while they've been around for a while, they started to be studied seriously as a different entity in economics only at the beginning of the new millennium. So it's a relatively recent...
So we're talking Google, Facebook,
Uber, Amazon, all these are platforms,
okay.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
And one of the characteristics is they naturally tend to become monopolies,
right.
Unless people can easily use multiple of them at the same time. So what is called in jargon multi-homing. I want to be where my friends are, and so I'm going to go where most of my friends are, that tend to be Facebook, and that tends to reinforce the importance of Facebook. But also, Facebook has very actively, that's a part that most people don't appreciate, is very actively trying to make it impossible to multi-home. 10 years ago, there was a little company called Power Ventures whose business model was to help you manage multiple social media at the same time. So you will give the login and password to all your social media to Power Venture, and then you log in Power Venture, you post your picture into Power Venture,
It goes
and
everywhere.
then Power Venture put it in Snap, Instagram, WhatsApp. You tell them, they do it,
Right.
okay? And vice versa. So Facebook sued Power Venture, claiming that they were hacking. And because they have good lawyers, and Power Venture was a startup and did not have good lawyers, they end up winning and establishing that if I give you my login and password of Facebook and you enter in my Facebook account with my permission, you are committing hacking, which is a federal crime. So they really use the power of the law to block this multi-homing. And
Thus lack of competition.
and then when you don't have multi-homing, you naturally tend to have these network externalities that I want to be where other people are. And so you end up having an enormous concentration like we have in Facebook today, which of course has been exacerbated by the fact that they bought Instagram and they bought WhatsApp,
Right.
which were two potential competitors.
It's easy to see the concerns and issues that these digital platforms present. It's harder to come up with solutions. But in 2019, Zingales convened a conference of economists, lawyers, journalists, venture capitalists, and data scientists to do just that. After months of research and debate, they devised a list of possible solutions and even submitted that list to Congress. The interesting thing that I thought as I read some of this is you guys came through some pretty practical, applicable recommendations, i.e., let's come up with a new digital regulatory agency or a digital authority. Can you talk about that and maybe some of these other very practical,
So
sensible
you're
things?
surprised that actually academics can come up with something practical, that we are not sort of dancing on a pinhead and saying crazy stuff?
Economists are never known for that, so that's okay.
Actually, I would say that the idea of creating a new agency is probably not the most original idea. It is right, but it's not the most original idea. When there is a problem, you create a committee, and I think there are potential risks involved in that too. But I think that the thing that, in my view, emerged the most and is something that we need to pay a lot of attention is the power is in the data. These platforms control their own data. There is no regulator that has access systematically to those data. So we don't even know the facts. In the old days, when there was TV, when TV was the thing, first of all, you had a Federal Communication Commission that actually looked at the TV, oversee the TV sector. But also, there were 3 channels at the beginning, 4 channels. Everybody watched the same channels. Everybody could see if there was something wrong or if something distorted in those channels. Today, with the digital platforms, I don't know what you see because what you see is different from what I see. Mm-hmm. And so we have some ads that target a particularly vulnerable sector of the population. Unless you belong to that sector, you're never going to see that ad. So you don't know the problem. And there is nobody watching this. So it's as if we have the best techniques to sell alcohol to the alcoholic or drugs to the drug addicts, and there is nobody watching.
In addition to a regulatory authority, they also recommended extending campaign disclosure obligations, imposing a fiduciary duty towards society on the boards of monopolies, and tightening many U.S. antitrust rules. And that last point about antitrust was a little controversial coming from a University of Chicago economist. We'll find out why after the break.
Capitalism is the engine of prosperity.
Actually, it sows the seeds of its own demise.
Could both be right? I'm Kate Waldock from Georgetown University.
And I'm Luigi Zingales from the University of Chicago.
We're the hosts of Capitalism, a podcast about what's working in capitalism today.
And most importantly, what isn't.
We're going to share this sort of irreverent banter you'd hear between economists at a bar.
That is, if economists were to go to a bar.
Subscribe to Capitalism. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts.
As we said at the beginning, Zingales' commencement speech made headlines in the New York Times. And it was specifically because of his views about antitrust enforcement. Antitrust laws deal with how monopolies are regulated. When you hear people talking about stronger antitrust enforcement for tech companies, they're usually talking about breaking them up. Split Instagram, for instance, from Facebook, YouTube from Google. Zingales thinks both of these are a great idea. To understand why that caused such a stir, you need to understand the history of the Chicago School of Economics.
So, first of all, there was an evolution over time. So, in the 30s and 40s, the position was dominated by Henry Simons, who wrote a very important pamphlet called The Positive Program for Laissez-Faire, where antitrust and antitrust enforcement played an extremely important role in keeping the market competitive and making the system work. Ironically, some of his students, George Stigler, Milton Friedman, and Aaron Director, who started from those positions over the years, became increasingly disillusioned about the role of antitrust.
And the issue of antitrust is of long standing. The basic antitrust legislation was enacted in 1890, and we've had many ups and downs in its applications. The law is supposed to promote competition, but on the whole, it probably does more to promote monopoly than it does competition. Moreover, it involves a very inefficient interference by the government into the dynamics of the economy.
This was the position of Chicago in the early 50s. And I think over the late 50s and 60s, the disillusion with the antitrust enforcement, in particular, number one, the aggressiveness of the enforcement and the lack of a coherent idea of what the antitrust was trying to achieve. At the time, economics was expanding in other areas, and Aaron Director was crucial in bringing economic methods into the law. And he said, we need to have a very clear objective of what the law wants to achieve, and we need to apply rigorously. And in particular, he was saying, and I think he was absolutely right on this, who enforces this law are the judges. The judges are not particularly trained on this, so you need to have some principle very clearly spell out to have a consistent law, because the worst thing is to have a completely ad hoc law. And so this is where the use of economic methods in the law started to become important. One of the students here, Robert Bork, started to say the goal of the antitrust is just to maximize consumer welfare, to benefit consumers at large, and a series of tools to measure this consumer welfare and to measure whether this will be maximized or not in mergers, etc., were developed. They became the standard in antitrust. And this became known as the Chicago School of Antitrust that ended up dominating the world. And
right.
This is not just in the United States, but when you go to Europe, you go to Latin America, you go to Asia, everybody knows the Chicago School, the Chicago approach. I think was a fantastic innovation, but in economics we learn there are always trade-offs. So what they traded off is to be more precise but less broad. And so the result was a very strong attention on consumer welfare, ignoring other considerations. And two, I think that they were so successful that basically antitrust stopped to be enforced. And for a while it was fine. I think we've gone too far. So the pendulum changes, and my view is changes depending on the circumstances. There are some times where concentration is a big problem and you have to fight it hard, and there are some other times in which the opposite is the problem. This is in the 1960s, companies were buying conglomerates, they're becoming conglomerates, buying unrelated line of businesses because they couldn't expand horizontally, and the conglomerate acquisition were terrible. So there was a sense that maybe at the time things were gone too much in one direction. I think stuff has gone too much in the opposite direction now. So I don't see myself in contradiction with the Chicago tradition. Quite the contrary, I see with a tradition that is evolving and changing like all good traditions, because we're not frozen into the 20th century.
Zingales often says that only an immigrant like himself can appreciate how rare American capitalism really is. He still views it as the only system that can really spread wealth, power, and opportunity. And he considers this battle against monopolies and the lack of competition they bring to be the central struggle of his adopted country.
This is not a Republican or a Democratic battle. It's an American battle. This country was born fighting monopolies. The Boston Tea Party was not, as often repeated, a revolt against higher taxes, but a revolt against the unfair advantage enjoyed in America by Britain's East India Company. The connection between American democracy and fight against monopolies was not lost on Senator John Sherman, who in 1890 brought us the first antitrust law. If we will not endure a king as political power, he wrote, we should not endure a king over the production, transportation, and sale of any of the necessaries of life. If there is one sentence from my speech I hope you will remember, this is the one.
Big Brains is a production of the UChicago Podcast Network. If you like what you heard, please give us a review and a rating. Our show is hosted by Paul M. Rand and produced by me, Matt Hodat. Thanks for listening.